Live now to Des Moines, where South Bend, Indiana Mayor and Democratic presidential candidate Pete Buttigieg will be speaking to the Asian and Latino coalition. They're just getting started. This is live here on C-SPAN.
Oh, I guess the floor is mine then. Mayor, thanks for joining us, Mayor. It's always good to see another mayor. Well, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here. I think we want this to be kind of long on interaction, right, and fairly short on lecture, I think is the format we're going for. So let me just say a little bit about what we're doing, then hopefully we'll get to questions and be able to visit some. But first of all, I just want to say how thrilled we are with the way that we found that our message is resonating. And what we've learned is that the very things that had initially looked like reasons that it would be hard to picture somebody like me being in contention for the Oval Office are actually the biggest things we have going for us right now. So, you think about, obviously, for one thing, a mayor is not always the first thing that comes to mind when people think about the American presidency. What's that? Potholes. Yeah. You start with the potholes and you go from there. And the pothole is the mortal enemy of the American mayor. Oh, I'm sorry. I'll speak up. Can you hear me now? Great. Just give a wave if I'm not talking loud enough. So I think what we've seen in Washington right now is an environment where we would be better served if Washington started acting a little more like our best-run cities and towns. One thing you never see is a city having its government shut down because of a disagreement on policy, right? It's unthinkable. We literally deliver the water, and you need water to live. So you're not going to see us shut down. We just have to figure it out and get things done. And I think we'd be well served to see more of that, not less of that, in our federal politics, too. I also think it's time for more nationally visible Democrats to come out of the American heartland. And I trust I'm preaching to the choir on that one. Nowhere is it written that the middle of the country ought to or has to be conservative. Think of the progressive tradition. Over the last 100 years, the progressive movement was born out of the Midwest in so many ways. The concerns of workers, the concerns of farmers have led to the kinds of policies that really make sure that we're putting people first. And that's what our party is all about. And I'm sick and tired of the idea that the only way we can advance in our communities in the Midwest, whether they're industrial communities or small cities or rural communities, that the only way we can advance is to turn back the clock. And that's what the current White House wants us to believe, that the only place we can find greatness is in the past. They've got to turn back the clock and make America great again, right? And it doesn't work that way. First of all, there are some reasons why things weren't quite as great as advertised to begin with. But also, for all of the things that we do want to emulate, all of the best moments in our past, those moments were brought to us by people in our past whose attribute was that they cared about the future, that they kept their eyes fixed forward. And that's why I believe that there's no such thing as an honest or constructive politics that revolves around the word again. Things are going to be different. Change is coming at a tectonic pace in this country. And we are going to have to respond. In some ways, you could argue even now we're underreacting. But our responsibility is not to make sure that changes stop, that technology stops, that communication stops, that developments in our society stop. Our responsibility is to make sure that those changes work for us, to make sure those changes make us better off in our everyday lives. That's what good policy does. It's what good government does. And I believe that good government is more important than the size or scale of government in deciding whether or not our lives will go better in the face of these kinds of change. I also believe that it's turned out to be an asset that I come from a different generation, that I maybe don't look the part in terms of having quite as many silver hairs as you'd expect a presidential candidate to have. Because what I see, and I see it in this room, is the potential to build a generational alliance of people who are focused on the future. We got to have a democratic message that makes sense even when 2020 comes and goes, even when this presidency comes and goes. And that means it's got to make as much sense in 2030 and in 2040 and in 2054, when, God willing, I come to be the age of the president today, that it makes as much sense then as now, which means, by definition, it can't be a message that revolves around the president. But we all have very strong reactions to this White House and the campaign that brought this White House in. And we got to confront falsehoods and confront policies that are harmful. But it can't, the more we allow ourselves to let it all be about him, the less it's going to be about you, the less it's going to be about us in our everyday lives. And so we have a chance to change the conversation. A horror show is a hard thing to look away from. But our responsibility is to change the channel and change it to something better. So that's why we're here. Now, the message that I'm trying to spread from coast to coast is about freedom, security, and democracy. It's my answer to those who say that us Democrats have trouble putting what we believe to where it fits on a bumper sticker. I think freedom, democracy, and security, that ought to be our bumper sticker. There are three words that express things that are universal values. In fact, nobody could be against freedom, democracy, or security, except I would argue that if you actually open up each of those subjects, if you actually dig into what they mean, they actually point you in a decidedly progressive direction when it comes to policy. We just have to make sure we're looking at each of those issues in their richest sense. That's what I mean when I talk about freedom. So our conservative friends talk about freedom all the time, right? And yet when they talk about freedom, it's as though the only thing that could make you unfree were government. They forget about all the other ways that we can be made unfree. Your neighbor can make you unfree if you don't have rules that decide how everybody's going to live. Your cable company can make you unfree sometimes. Your county clerk can make you unfree if they get to tell you who you ought to marry. So real freedom means making sure that we are securing the ability to live a life of our choosing. And that's why health care is freedom. Delivering health care to more Americans so that you can, for example, feel free to start a small business because you're not afraid that leaving your old job means losing your health care. That's freedom too. If we're the ones defending your ability to organize for a good day's pay and fair conditions for a fair day's work, then we are the ones supporting your freedom. Public school educators want the freedom to be able to do their jobs by their own lights and not have their job performance reduced to a number on a page. So let's talk about that kind of freedom. And let's talk about the freedom for women to make their own reproductive health care choices without a male politician imposing it on them. That's what I think it means to talk about freedom in its richer, thicker sense. And it's not going to happen unless we're out there to advocate for it. Because the right kind of government policy can secure that freedom just as much as the wrong kind of policy can infringe upon it. So let's talk about freedom. Let's talk about security. As a veteran, I am so sick of the idea that security or patriotism belong to one party. These are American values. And the flag that was stitched to my shoulder, actually it was Velcroed on, when I went into Afghanistan, was not the property of one party or the other party. But I will say that only one party seems to be concerned with some of the security threats that are going to face us in the 21st century. You know, we need to come out and talk about how there's more to security than putting up a wall from sea to shining sea. Global security means that we are actually competing with the Chinese model, which is being held up as an alternative because America looks so divided, confused, and weakened right now. We need to talk about cybersecurity at a time when, talk about something you can't put up a wall to deal with. A time when cybersecurity threats are only going to increase. It would help if we had people in charge who understood what cybersecurity is. It would also help when we're getting ready to deal with what I think is the security challenge of our time, to be ready to act on climate and to define climate as a security issue. Extreme weather events are happening more and more and more often, just like they warned us they would. I was just in Marshalltown, where they recovered from a devastating tornado. Our river cities, from Iowa to South Bend, have faced increased frequency and severity of river flooding. In my city, we had to fire up the Emergency Operations Center twice in less than 2 years for floods that should have been more rare than once in a lifetime. First one was 1,000-year flood. Next one was a 500-year flood. You do the math on that, that's 125,000 to 1 that would happen 18 months apart. So either the laws of mathematics are changing or the climate is changing around us. We know this. And lives are on the line. So why not talk about this as the security issue that it is? And now I want to talk about democracy, because all of the other issues we care about, from climate to public education to healthcare to you name it, will be very hard to address until we have a democracy that's working better for us. And that means we have to be willing to talk about the structure and talk about reform. I don't think we're the kind of democracy we aspire to be if districts are drawn to where politicians are choosing their voters instead of the other way around. That's not my idea of democracy. Why wouldn't we reform our politics so that people actually get more of a vote than money does? If we're serious about our democracy, then we have to be serious about making sure the Supreme Court stops sliding down this slippery slope toward being regarded as a nakedly political institution. The problem isn't just that it's more conservative than the American people. The problem is it has become politicized, and that is bad for the court and bad for the country, and we ought to do something about it. And at risk of sounding a little simplistic, when it comes to the presidency, I believe the best way to pick the leader of a country that calls itself a democracy is to have an election, count up all the votes, and then give it to the woman or man who got the most votes. Call me simplistic, but that's how I would do it. So as I travel the country talking about these issues, what I find is that people are ready to think big. We're at one of those moments between eras in American politics, and I hope this is well understood, that as high stakes as this election is, as much as the next 4 years are going to decide a lot of things in our lives, what's really being decided is the shape of an era to come. I find that American politics, American history, often moves in these eras that are 30, 40, or 50 years at a time. There was one that kicked off with FDR and the New Deal, and it explained how our politics worked for a good 40 years or so, to where even Republicans in the 50s or in the 70s sounded a lot like Democrats do today. And then something changed. The right got very organized, and they were very disciplined, and they were very patient, and they were very clever, and they built a Reagan era, not just a Reagan presidency. But I would say if you start the clock in 1980 and you take it all the way almost to today, or a few years ago, there's just a certain way of doing things, a certain set of assumptions that dominated the way we thought about politics that helped to explain how Democrats as well as Republicans behaved. At the time, it was going without question, for example, that if you just cut taxes and make sure the wealthiest are wealthy, that'll trickle its way down and find its way to the rest of us. Even Democrats bought into that to some extent. Then we tried it, and it turns out it doesn't work. So what we're seeing now is the dawn of a new era. I think the rest of my life is going to be decided by decisions that are made in these next few years. And we have a responsibility to win not just an election, but an era, which has the potential to be beautifully enlightened or incredibly ugly, depending largely on what happens in the next few months and the next few years. Now, as much as I like talking about the grand sweep of history and political theory, the other thing I'm trying to return our focus to is everyday life. because that's what motivates me to be in politics in the first place. And I come at this from a very personal place. First of all, from military service, because I think anytime you have that experience of packing your bags and putting a letter in a drawer and writing just in case on it and putting it where your folks can find it if you don't come back, you never again forget the stakes of political decisions. You never again forget that it isn't about who looked good in the committee hearing or who sounds good on cable. It's about how this cashes out for everyday lives, including people whose lives depend on the wisdom and judgment of the American Commander-in-Chief. But it's also happened in some of my most vulnerable and important moments here at home. And one moment I've been learning to share with others because it's helped me to illustrate what I think is on the line is one of the toughest days in my life when I left the bedside of my mother to go notify my father, who was across town in the middle of chemotherapy treatment, that the doctors were saying she was going to need immediate open heart surgery. I didn't want to put that in a text, so I got in the car. Spoiler alert, Mom's fine, she's right over there. So she came roaring back, but we didn't know that morning. And it was a very tender and very difficult time for our whole family. But I had a few things going for me. Had Father Brian, the priest from St. James, our faith community, who was there at the hospital with our family. And I also had going for me the fact that my caring and amazing, loving husband was there with her throughout that whole situation. And I think he's in here too, but I lost track of him. Back there somewhere. Oh, all the way in the back. Hey, Lef. So I guess what I'm saying is the really important thing for us was that it was natural for him to be at the hospital bedside of my mother, because in the eyes of the hospital and the eyes of the law, and not just in our hearts, he was my lawfully married spouse. By the way, I'd like to thank the people of Iowa for proving that the Midwest could get on board with that before everybody else. And then in the weeks and months that followed, as things got better for Mom and worse for Dad, what we also learned was how much we were depending on policy to make sure that our family wasn't going to be bankrupted by all this. Because for all its imperfections, Medicare is the reason that we had the freedom to concentrate our family decisions on one thing. What was right for us as a family? What was medically right for Mom and for Dad? What we didn't have to think about was, will this break our family financially? Because some people, before I was born, in those big white buildings in Washington, made some decisions. And they decided that this shouldn't be something that would destroy a family. And it's why I'm motivated to make sure that not just people who currently qualify for Medicare, but every single American enjoys that same kind of health care. That's why we have politics, because our everyday lives depend on these things. They depend on whether our wages are going up or whether they're stuck. They depend on whether we can get good benefits. They depend on these choices made by politicians. And I think it's a very Midwestern thing for us to keep our politics grounded that way. And it's going to be hard. It's going to take incredible discipline, because what we have right now is a show. And what we've got to do is concentrate on what really matters. But I believe that the solutions are going to come from our communities, that the right kind of politics and the right kind of ideas are going to come from our communities. And I seem to be hitting a chord around the country, so we're going to keep spreading that message all the way up to the Iowa caucuses. I am thankful to be here. I promise not to lecture the whole time, so I'm just going to pause, and I believe there's some questions that have been brought to us today.
Mayor,
We get the award and then.
I'm sorry, we have something special for you. So, Andrea,
Just a quick word. Iowa is known for a lot of things to do first. Brown versus Board of Education, Iowa was used as precedence. Iowa is the only state that has a town named after a Muslim, Emir Abdul Qadir. Al-Qaeda, Iowa, is named after Emir Muslim. So we are famous, Iowa is famous for, and not to mention marriage equality. It is not possible without the advocacy of every one of you, how we stand out front. We might be a small state of 2-3 million people, but we make global differences. With that, Asian Latino Coalition has followed Mayor, as Andrea said. She really followed him. And we would like to give an advocacy award. Advocacy is what makes us best. So Mayor, on behalf of Coalition.
No, thank you. That's fantastic. Thank you very much. Really appreciate that. All right.
Okay, we're going to start with the questions. We have 6 questioners from the coalition, each one of them members. Amanda Levon is going to be the facilitator. She'll read off each name, and we'll go ahead and I'm going to get is the portable mic over there?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Okay. Welcome, Mayor Pete. So happy you could be here with us today. Our first question comes from Brandon Bennett, and it will be on gun control.
Brandon's right over here.
Luke.
Hi, Mayor. First off, thank you for coming. I'm from Des Moines, and I grew up in rural Iowa on a farm. You and I are only 2 years apart in age, and we are millennials from the school shooting generation. My question is surrounding responsible gun reform. I'm a hunter and a responsible gun owner. However, I'm sick and tired of seeing our children and teachers murdered at their schools. You're an Afghan war vet, you hunted with your father-in-law, and you're a member of the Mayors Against Illegal Guns group. You've also advocated for universal background checks and possibly banning assault rifles. If elected president, what policies and measures would you take to ensure responsible gun laws?
First of all, thank you for that, and thank you for raising that issue, because it's so important to us, and I think it's been used to divide Americans who have the same values and interests against each other. As you mentioned, like you, I come from a place where gun rights are taken very seriously, and that's okay. The reality is that the gun safety measures we're calling for are completely compatible with the Second Amendment. We know this to be true, and by the way, they're widely popular. You know, one of the reasons I think we got to tune up our democracy is you got to ask yourself on something like background checks, where 80 or 90% of Americans, including most Republicans, most gun owners, believe we ought to do this. How is it that Washington can't make it happen? How did the center of gravity of the American people move so different from the center of gravity of the American Congress? And we know some of the answers, right? Money in politics, districting, all the rest of it. But it's one of the reasons why I think we got to do some of these structural reforms. That being said, as president, I plan to continue to advocate for, and I think successfully advocate, for things like universal background checks. For us also to tighten up the ability of the federal government to enforce some of this gun trafficking that goes on, which has been one of our focuses among the Mayors Against Illegal Guns. And mayors care about this issue because it's the worst part of our job, is getting that message or phone call that we lost another person, usually a young person, to gun violence, or for that matter, to gun suicide in our communities. And, you know, as a mayor who's had that experience time and time again, as mayor who's there when we swear in our cops with their spouses and sometimes children at their side, and does not wish to see them outgunned in their own neighborhoods, as somebody who is very familiar from my military training with weapons of war, somebody who carried a rifle and a pistol around a foreign land on the orders of a president, there are some weapons that just don't belong in our neighborhoods in peacetime in America. And we've already decided that this is within the Second Amendment because we've decided that somewhere in between a slingshot and a nuclear weapon, we can draw a line. And that's not unconstitutional, it's common sense. And that's why I think assault rifles need to be on the table, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. Our next question comes from Ed Fallon of Bold, Iowa, and it will be on climate change.
Well, Andrew's right. You're awesome.
Thank you.
Honestly, I've been an activist and a politician since 1987, and I've never seen such an impressive field of Democratic candidates running for president. So, so you've got some competition.
Good problem.
So, climate change, again, it's not an issue, it's a crisis.
Yes.
It's like you come home and there's a painting that's fallen off the wall, there's glass everywhere, your sink is dripping, and your wastebasket's on fire. I know which one you're going to attend to first. We're all going to attend to that flaming wastebasket first. And even right now, it's already happening. I mean, there are Asian nations that are going to be lost because of the sea level rise.
Right.
There are Honduran farmers who can no longer farm because of climate change impact on that country. And so I guess what I'm waiting to hear from a candidate is the distinction between all those important issues which we have to address and the fact that we have a crisis that if we don't reduce emissions by 45% by 2030, nothing else is going to matter. I guess I'm looking for a candidate that's going to make that clear so that the media understand it, so that other candidates start hearing that there's people out there talking about that.
Right.
And I'm hoping and wondering if that might be something you'll consider a slight shift in how you present in order to make sure people understand the crisis level of climate.
Yeah, you'll hear a lot from us on this. And part of the way I view it is that, you know, hitting those targets by 2030, there's a lot of hand-wringing over whether we can do it. Which, first of all, as an American, when we set an ambitious target, we can make it happen. I mean, think of the things we've done as a country, right? If we can't lead the way on this, who are we? But also making clear that that timeline isn't being set by Congress, it's being set by science. Those deadlines are going to come and go with or without us. And so the only question is whether we're prepared to do what we already know as a matter of reality has to be done. It's why I talk about this as a security issue. I also think, by the way, the good news is we can gain a lot through the national mobilization to deal with this as our top crisis that we're confronting, right? I mean, the thing about confronting major issues, the Cold War, World War II, Great Depression, is our country came together and worked on it. And I think our country needs a national project right now. It needs a way to rally people together and call us to do something greater than we've been doing. And it's perhaps morally healthy that this time, unlike some of the other conflicts we've faced, the wolf at the gates, if you will, it's not other human beings. It's something that all of us need to change. And that's why we need to be very aggressive in dealing with this. Some of it is through policy mechanisms we already know we can do, like carbon pricing, a carbon tax. Now, I know the T word is not one you're supposed to use when you're running for office. But we can also take it and rebate it right back out to the American people. When we do that, though, we're going to change the pricing structure in order to make it more responsible so that the true cost, because we're paying one way or the other, but the true cost of carbon emissions is seen. The other thing that I think is really exciting is that we can create a lot of jobs here. Think of the jobs for the building trades, from the kind of retrofits that we've got to do. Think of the jobs we're going to unlock in my own community. We got union auto workers working for a startup that's doing electrical vehicles. And those are good jobs for our community. We need to invest research in technologies we don't even have yet, too. And if the federal government, through research programs, literally invented the internet, you can leave your Al Gore joke behind, literally invented the internet, then why can't we invent better means of energy storage and carbon storage than we have today? And if that takes federal investment, what would have a better return on investment than heading off $1 trillion problem that we're staring down the barrel of? But I think as a matter of strategy, and the matter we talk about it, we got to talk about this as something that's up close and personal, that's happening to us, around us today. And, you know, when you go on TV and they talk about climate, they usually show pictures of the Arctic. And I've been to the Arctic. It's beautiful. But the problem is happening to us here in our homes. It was the homes that were destroyed in South Bend by historic floods. It's the homes that were lost in California to wildfire. And all the destruction that's happened right here in Iowa. So let's talk about this as what it is, which is not something that's theoretical, not something that's happening somewhere else, but something that is happening to us right now, and we can't act fast enough to do something about it. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. Our next question comes from Sally. She is the Iowa Democratic Party Latino Caucus Chair, and her question will be about DACA.
All right, thank you.
Hi, my name is Araceli. They call me Sally because they couldn't say my name. A lot of things changed around here. But my question is, with the Dream and Promise Act in 2019, it's just in March it came out. It's a lot of things that are being focused on. And it only doesn't cover just DACA people, okay? But it also the deferred enforced deportation, and also the temporary protected status. And we have a lot of people in that, and still here in Iowa.
Right.
And so some of the things when I got the question, I went around and asked people, what do you think of this? And the first reaction that I got about this was that it was taking away jobs for all these people that are here that are undocumented, and they're the refugees that are brought into our country. And then the other thing was that a population explosion that we have in this country, that our country cannot support all these people. So what is your response to that? Of these people that are saying these things, that we don't need these people here.
We need people here. We need to grow. My community, if we got responsible, able-bodied people on a path to citizenship, send them to South Bend, because we're trying to grow our community. And job growth and population growth go hand in hand. So, there's a political strategy that's clearly been adopted by the president to try to divide us around the issue of immigration. And I get it. Look, it appeals to a certain sense that I think all of us share, that there should be a process for these things. My father is an immigrant. He went through this process. He arrived in the country as a student. He became an American citizen. But we can't expect that process to work if we're not willing to fix it. Now, when it comes to what we ought to do in immigration policy, I think most Americans actually broadly agree on what to do. We need a pathway to citizenship. We need temporary protected status and protections for dreamers. We need to improve our lawful immigration processes that are bureaucratic and that are backlogged. And we need to do whatever's appropriate and necessary on border security. I think we can agree on all that. If leadership has to do with taking a divisive issue and bringing people together around it, then I guess the opposite of leadership is when you have a consensus issue and dividing people around it, which is what's being done right now out of the White House. And it's unfortunate because we know, despite what they say about us here in the heartland, we know how much our communities benefit from the growth that happens through immigration. Of course we want it to be through a lawful, orderly process, but we got to fix the process or it's never going to work. Now, the Senate passed comprehensive immigration reform, and it died in the House. So it's another example of Washington being broken. But I think with presidential leadership, we can get it done. And we're going to have to. Because our economy and the trajectory of this country depend on it. But if somebody thinks America's full, I can tell you my community in Indiana isn't full. We were built for 130,000 people, and we only got 100 now. So I got enough fire stations and roads and police officers and water capacity to take 30,000 more people, and I could use 30,000 more taxpayers to help us fund it. También me gustaría decir que proteger a los soñadores y establecer un sentido de unificación es una prioridad para mi campaña, pero debe ser una prioridad por el presidente, porque el presidente es el presidente de todo el pueblo que están aquí.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. Our next question comes from Rachel Ramirez from NARAL Pro-Choice, Iowa, and her question is about reproductive rights.
Hi. So first I wanted to say thank you for your military service.
Thank you.
My question for you is, women in the military fight for our freedom every day, yet our government blocks them from having the freedom to choose abortion if they have an unintended pregnancy. Would you support legislation to allow them the freedom to have access to the full range of reproductive health care options?
Yes. Just to expand on that a little bit, I understand why this issue is politically challenging. where I come from, and I think around here too, there are many people who view it differently. There are people I consider friends, people who are my supporters, who don't share the same view on this issue that I do. But when I think, first of all, about the nature of freedom, and also when I think about decisions that women face that, frankly, are not even possible for me to understand, that they have to face because of challenging medical or personal circumstances. I understand how it might be useful for them to have a doctor involved in those decisions. I do not understand how it would be useful to have the intervention of a male politician in those decisions. So healthcare is healthcare, and we need to make healthcare available to everybody that the United States is in charge of supporting and protecting.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. Our next question comes from Matt McCoy. He's our Democratic Polk County Supervisor, and his question will... and he will be asking you about mental health.
Thanks, Mayor. I just wanted to first of all say, you know, in Polk County, on any given day, we have 1,100 people in our jail. And of that, a large percentage, we're estimating somewhere around 40 to 50%, either have a serious substance abuse issue or a serious mental health issue. As mayor, how did you deal with mental health? And as a country, as our president, future president, how will you deal with mental health, and how will you support communities like Polk County addressing their mental health needs?
First of all, thank you for your service in local government, which is obviously close to my heart. And like you, we've faced this challenge that in many ways, the first line of contact on mental health is our law enforcement system. And our law enforcement system is not set up to be a mental health provider. And yet, in many ways, for many people, it's the closest thing they get. Maybe it's the only thing they get. And so we are confronting the lack of resources for mental health, and it's costing us more than it would to invest in the first place in treatment, whether we're talking about mental health issues related to addiction or those that are not related to addiction. There is clearly a resource deficit. The wait lists, the limited availability of clinical help is costing us immensely. We do need to wire some of that up to our criminal justice system, I think, just because there's so much overlap. But more broadly, I think we need a culture and a policy. The policy part is mental health parity, making sure that in every health decision we make, we treat mental health the same as we do physical health. The culture thing that has to change, I think, is breaking the silence around healthcare, around mental health issues, because it has been stigmatized to where a lot of people who are confronting some kind of issue or who have a loved one confronting some kind of issue believe mistakenly that they're alone. When actually we're talking about issues that touch a quarter to a fifth of our entire population. That means somebody that everybody knows or loves, or one of us. And these issues are particularly acute in communities like the community of veterans or the community of LGBTQ Americans, both of which I'm part of. So simply breaking the silence and making sure we talk about these issues in a culture that sometimes is still inclined to look at mental health as a moral issue, not as a medical one, is something that I think leadership at the highest level can do, even as we're trying to align on everything from Medicare reimbursement policies to the way we invest in basic research in the NIH to make sure that mental health parity is a part of our policy foundation. I'm going to mention something that's related but a little different, which is the fight on the opioid crisis, because obviously there's some overlap there. And again, here we've learned that things like medication-assisted treatment can go a very long way toward addressing these issues, making them less fatal, and helping people get their lives back on track, which means we need more resources for that. But again, some of it's culture. We set up, there was a needle exchange set up in Indiana. It was difficult, it was controversial, but it had to be done. This was in southern Indiana a few years ago because there was an HIV outbreak. And in a low-income rural area, a shocking number of people there were addicted to injection drug use. And when they set up the needle exchange, they were able not only to break the growth of the HIV epidemic, but they were also able to get people enrolled in Medicaid, to get people connected up to services. And it became that kind of front gate that otherwise is very often law enforcement. I was told when I visited the needle exchange that when they set up a mobile unit to help people in neighborhoods, because you got very isolated people who can't even make it, across the county to get help, that sometimes the sheriff would have a vehicle following the vehicle delivering this healthcare support so that they would know who to arrest. So we need to make sure that we establish what our priorities are culturally and demonstrate that we understand that addiction issues are medical issues in order for any of the other policy pieces to fall into place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. Our next question comes from Tamara Harris about D.C. statehood.
Tamara Harrison. Hi, thank you for being here. There are over 713,000 Americans living in this country that are disenfranchised, that don't share the same equal rights as everybody else in America. I would like to know, because we need to keep this in the conversation between now and the caucuses, the primary, the election. It's not enough to just come out and say you support statehood for Washington, D.C. We need to keep it in the conversation, and I want to know how you could work to build a bridge, a bipartisan bridge to actually make this finally happen for the people of D.C.
Thank you. Yes, D.C. ought to be a state. D.C. ought to have the same. These are fellow Americans, fellow U.S. citizens who lack political representation. And it's one of the things I'm getting at when I talk about why democracy ought to rise on our list of priorities. And the thing with democracy is it's an example of one of those things that's always important but never seemed urgent, right? We always cared about it. I think most of us have always felt that it's kind of wrong or strange to have some of these undemocratic qualities, whether it's the lack of D.C. statehood or money in politics or districts or whatever. It just never felt like one of the 2 or 3 top things we had to deal with because a lot of times it feels like the house is on fire. And yet I think if 2016 taught us anything, it's that we get terrible outcomes and we'll continue to get terrible outcomes until we have our democracy repaired. And part of that, put very simply, is making sure that U.S. citizens have fair representation. Now, there are partisan political reasons that is being blocked, but they're not good reasons. Nobody has a good reason in principle for why a server at a restaurant who lives in an apartment in D.C. ought to be treated any differently than her counterpart in Des Moines or in South Bend. And so I have not yet heard a remotely convincing moral argument or even political argument other than that, one side thinks it'll make them worse off, which I'm sorry, but that's not an acceptable reason. And by the way, I recently spoke with the governor of Puerto Rico where, what happened to them in the response to Hurricane Maria, I think would never have happened if they had electoral votes on the U.S. presidency. So they ought to. So you'll hear a lot about that from me, and we're going to have to keep pushing. And again, it's making sure it stays high enough on the list that it actually gets action. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pete. We have one last question. So most of us in this room have watched you speak online, and we're really excited by your ideas and really excited by your ability to communicate calmly, clearly, and intelligently, especially when the topic is potentially contentious and even divisive. However,
there you go.
However, given the polarization in our nation, and even more so in Congress, how will you build the necessary bipartisan coalitions to enact your ideas in a sustainable way?
So this is going to be the question the next president has to face, and I'm under no illusion that it will be easy. It's one of the reasons why we have to prioritize democratic reform. And by the way, we may have to change some norms in Washington. The filibuster has a pretty mixed history to begin with, and we should consider doing away with the filibuster so the next president can get something done. But also, again, if the American Congress gets far enough away from the American people, then there will be some accountability for that, even with the twisted districting that we have right now. We saw it in 2018. we saw how many new, including from this state, how many people were sent to Congress in areas that had voted more conservatively. And I think it shows that if a president is willing to get out there, if a president is willing to go to the district of a member of Congress whose constituents know what the right thing to do is, but where that member just won't do the right thing, go there and apply the pressure in person if necessary in order to get a better outcome. So some of this is going to be, it's going to be kind of hard knuckle politics, but the thing is you don't have to be a jerk about it. That's the part we've been missing. You can be, don't get me wrong, we will fight fiercely for what we believe in. But there's a way to do it that I think can draw people to the right side. I see it. When we're having conversations, most of us have friends of the other persuasion. I think most of us have the humility to know that we're not shining, morally perfect human beings because of the way we voted, any more than we think they're morally defective human beings because of the way they voted. We need to have the humility to recognize that people are capable of good and bad things. Every one of us. Just ask somebody that you love that you've also hurt in a weak moment. But also ask somebody that you've done a lot of good for. We can all do good and bad things. And not just political leadership, but moral leadership is the kind of leadership that calls us to do good things more often than we do bad things. And sometimes it's a matter of substance. Sometimes it's just a matter of tone. It's what I learned as mayor, that as much as I'm a policy guy that does numbers and policies and management and performance, that actually most of the times I really earned my paycheck were moments when there was a moral strain on our community. And I had to figure out some way to call that community, as divided as it was, to higher values. And we need a president to do that too. As a matter of fact, that might be the most important thing we need our president to do, to call out what's best in us. All right.
Mayor Pete, before we wrap up, we want to thank a few special people here today. First, we're here in the House of Labor. We would like to thank the machinists who let us use the facility over and over again. Also, we'd like to thank Ken Sager, the president of Iowa Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. Also, we'd like to thank Polk County Supervisor Matt McCoy. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Also, we want to thank some of our members of our coalition who helped us out today. Max Dower, who's done our RDO technician, time and time again. Thank you very much. We have Roseanne Norris, who's on our board. Roseanne, she's our arrangements chair. Also on our board too, Amanda Levon, who's our secretary. Thank you very much for our checking. We also have Suzette Jensen over here too. Thank you very much, Suzette, for helping with the media check-in today too. And we also like to thank our friends in the media. We enjoy having you, and please come by more often. And I'm sure we'll have Mayor Pete back next month. Thank you very much, Mayor Pete. We'll give you triple the crowd next time. Thank you. I'm going to hand it over to our chair now, Prakash Pakarpet.
Thank you very much, Mayor, for answering all the key questions. And it is very important for the coalition to make sure that this message is carried forward throughout the country, that coalitions and everyone is part of the same conversation. And with that, I would like to recognize the Cornell College students and Dr. Fisher right there. They came all the way from Cornell. American politics. We thought it was important to be part of this conversation and with you. So thank you for making the trip. And we also have visitors from Cedar Rapids. You are here, please raise your hand.
Well, Cornell is.
Cornell is.
Non-burning.
So, and thank you very much for everyone. Now, Mayor, for your closing remarks.
Well, mainly just a big thank you to the Asian and Latino Coalition for hosting us, for all of the leaders who are here, for what you do. Because I know from our first visit that we had on a colder, darker day than today, that what you're building here is more than just an opportunity for the 20 or so of us to come through and try to get our message out, but really you're building social capital. And at a moment when we're really being pulled apart, social capital that is built in a community of people who share similar values, the kind of social capital that's built in organized labor, that's built in our party, that's going to get us through this moment. And I'm very mindful that, of course, I'm doing this because I believe policies matter, politicians matter, and that process matters. But what matters most, I think, is the human interaction that happens around it. The ability to feel, I mean, doesn't this room just make you feel more hopeful at a bleak moment in American politics? So I'm honored to be part of that. We will try to emulate that in the way we design our own campaign, which right now is a very small but very mighty team, and will continue to grow and organize around you. If you're attracted to this message, I hope you'll take a minute to visit PeteForAmerica.com and make sure we know how to stay in touch with you. But as you say, this will be the first of many visits and interactions, I trust. And the biggest thing I have to say is just that I really believe that this is worth it, that even in a moment, especially a moment like the one we're in, which is, let's face it, a tough one for our country and for our communities and for our families. You feel it at Thanksgiving dinner, you feel it at coffee after church, you feel the concern and the division, and yet that means we have the opportunity to do something historic, that we are going to change the trajectory of the country. I believe it can be done. I believe the American presidential election is one of the best mechanisms America has to heal itself and to have the conversations that need to be had. And I can't wait to continue visiting Iowa and hopefully to earn your support the night of the caucuses. Thank you.